The headlines show you a missile test. Turkey confirms the readiness of its Seeper-1 system. This is a calculated distraction, a kinetic firework designed to hold your attention. The calculus of modern warfare is no longer measured in explosive payloads. It is measured in terabits per second. The real war is silent. The primary vector of strategic attack is invisible. According to CSIS analysis, the critical liability is not what flies through the air, but what lies on the ocean floor. The fiber optic cables that function as the central nervous system of the global economy. One cut does not matter. A coordinated multi-point severance induces a systemic liquidity crisis. This asymmetric strategy operates on two axes. First, sever the physical data conduits. Second, blind the eyes in the sky. Adversaries are not preparing to shoot down satellites, a high-cost, high-attribution act. They are posturing to dazzle, jam, and disable them with non-kinetic effects, rendering the network deaf and dumb. This creates the strategic end state, a blind Leviathan. A state with overwhelming conventional power, but its command and control, its financial markets, and its intelligence apparatus are rendered inert. A giant, flailing in darkness, unable to project force because it cannot process data. Its kinetic strength becomes a mathematical liability. The pivot to asymmetric warfare is not a strategic preference. It is a symptom of a solvency crisis. For a state like Russia, a conventional kinetic war becomes a catastrophic domestic liability. CSIS analysis confirms that prolonged, high-casualty conflicts are politically unsustainable. The cost, measured in materiel and public consent, exceeds any potential geopolitical gain. The state's ability to project conventional power becomes insolvent. This is a mathematical calculation, not an ideological one. Weakness forces this pivot. When a state cannot afford the kinetic cost to achieve its objectives, it must find a new vector. The objective is no longer to defeat the U.S. military on a battlefield, but to degrade the U.S. economic base at a fraction of the cost. The years-long cyber siege on AWS infrastructure is the blueprint. It is a low-cost, high-impact systemic attack designed to erode economic stability without crossing the kinetic threshold for a declared war. This forced adaptation is accelerated by U.S. strategic overstretch. As analysts note, a U.S. action in a theater like Venezuela directly creates a leverage opportunity for China. Adversaries observe that U.S. resources are finite and its focus is divided. This confirms that the return on investment for asymmetric attacks is rising exponentially. They can bleed the system with 1,000 cuts, knowing a full-scale conventional response is increasingly improbable. This is not war as you know it. It is balance sheet warfare. The core of this systemic failure is economic. It is a crisis of lethality and solvency. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, provides the baseline calculation. The kinetic cost to field a modern main battle tank is approximately $5 million. The cost for an adversary to achieve a mission kill on that asset with a commercially derived FPV drone is $500. The math does not lie. This is not a balanced exchange. It is a state-sponsored program of capital destruction. For every dollar of conventional capability the U.S. projects, an adversary can achieve a disproportionate destructive effect for a fraction of a cent. It creates a lethal arbitrage opportunity against the U.S. industrial and economic base, a vector for systemic economic attrition. Strategic planners refer to this phenomenon as the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal force has collapsed. State-level military dominance, once guaranteed by exclusive access to high-cost, high-tech platforms, is now being directly challenged by actors wielding off-the-shelf technology. The West's monopoly on effective violence is insolvent. This cost imbalance is the mathematical engine driving the global pivot to asymmetric warfare. Adversaries have zero incentive to engage in a platform-on-platform conflict they cannot win. Instead, they leverage this economic asymmetry to bleed the system dry, degrading assets and economic capacity without ever crossing a kinetic threshold that would trigger a symmetrical, full-scale response. The geography of conflict is no longer defined by front lines. It is defined by gray zones, permissive environments used as proxy laboratories for asymmetric attacks. These are not the headline theaters of war. They are the staging areas where the weapons that target the U.S. economic base are tested and deployed with zero kinetic cost. A years-long Russian cyber siege on AWS infrastructure, as documented by CRN magazine, does not require a physical presence in Virginia. The attack vector can be routed through a server farm in a nation with a compromised legal or digital infrastructure. The gray zone provides plausible deniability and a low-cost operational base. Strategic overstretch is the primary accelerant for the creation of these zones. As Reuters analysts note, a U.S. focus on a single theater like Venezuela creates a power vacuum elsewhere, presenting a leverage opportunity for adversaries like China. These vacuums are not geographic. They are gaps in strategic bandwidth, immediately exploited by proxy forces. According to CSIS assessments, these laboratories are not confined to failed states. They include politically fragmented Western nations. Internal instability, whether in South Africa or even Canada, can be leveraged to establish logistical hubs for information warfare or economic subversion. The objective is to use the system's own infrastructure as the delivery mechanism for the payload. This is the operational blueprint for the solvency crisis. The gray zones are where the 1,000 asymmetric cuts are sharpened. By externalizing the risk and staging attacks from these territories, adversaries degrade the U.S. economic and political foundation without ever crossing a kinetic threshold that would justify a conventional response. It is a mathematical bleed-out, orchestrated from the shadows. The launch-on warning protocol is a relic of Cold War mathematics, designed to solve a zero-sum problem: how to retaliate against a decapitation strike before your own command structure is vaporized. The doctrine mandates that if National Command Authority detects an incoming nuclear salvo, it must launch its own arsenal before the enemy warheads arrive. It is a use-it-or-lose-it framework. The solvency of this entire protocol rests on a single fragile assumption: the integrity of the warning data. This assumption is now void. The years-long Russian cyber siege on critical infrastructure like AWS, as documented by CRN magazine, is not an isolated event. It is a blueprint. It establishes the capability of a state actor to degrade the foundational data systems of its adversary without firing a shot. This creates a new non-kinetic attack vector aimed directly at the nervous system of nuclear command and control. This leads to the fog of digital war. Imagine a commander's screen. Is the incoming signal a genuine launch, or is it a sophisticated spoof, a digital ghost injected into the satellite feed? Have the early warning radars gone blind because of a kinetic attack? Or have they been isolated by a network intrusion? The kinetic cost of guessing wrong is absolute. In this scenario, the commander is forced to make a solvency decision with incomplete data. The protocol, as written, does not account for digital ambiguity. According to CSES analysis, hesitation invites decapitation. Action based on a false positive triggers systemic collapse. An adversary no longer needs to build 1,000 missiles. They only need to create a single, irrefutable doubt in the data stream to force their opponent's hand. The weakness in the code becomes a direct vector for vertical escalation. The years-long cyber siege against assets like AWS infrastructure is not the end game. It is the preparatory phase. The next vector is a calibration shot, a non-kinetic event designed to test the solvency of the U.S. response architecture under conditions of strategic overstretch and alliance fragmentation, dynamics confirmed by reports from Reuters and the operational independence of systems like Turkey's Sapir-1. The objective is not destruction, but data collection on response time, political paralysis, and the precise kinetic cost required to restore order. The event must be technically deniable to prevent a launch-on warning posture. CSIS projects that the ideal target is a node, where digital and physical supply chains intersect with maximum fragility. The forecast is mathematical. Within 12 months, anticipate a cascading full-spectrum shutdown of the data infrastructure managing a primary U.S. maritime logistics hub. The Port of Los Angeles Long Beach complex is the highest probability target. A 72-hour paralysis of crane operations and digital customs clearance, triggered by dormant malware. Attribution will be impossible, officially blamed on a catastrophic system update failure. The signal, however, will be irrefutable.